Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
So verse 6 of chapter 4, just remind ourselves what the pasuk says, Vayomer Adonai lo od, depending on where we put the od. God said to Moshe, either the od goes backwards. Furthermore, God continued to speak to Moshe, Havei na yadcha, bring, pray, your hand, b'chaikecha, to your bosom, into your bosom. We played with that a little bit. Vayavei yado b'chaiko, he brought or he took his hand into or to or towards or on top of his bosom. Remember, one of the words we looked at suggests that chaik cannot not only mean the bosom and the body, but the cloak that you wear over your bosom, and this could be an understanding of a fold inside the bosom, inside the cloak. Vayotziyah, he took it out. The mapike and the hey is for the feminine of yad. V'hine yado mitzoraat, and behold, his hand was, and in the translation here, we saw kind of the eliding of the meaning. It was as leprous as snow, right? And we discussed how what it doesn't, it's really a three-part analogy. It was as white as in, which connected it to both leprosy, I'm using that term even though we know it's not really leprosy, as snow is. So the adjective of mitzoraat really should be livana, but instead it's mitzoraat. And we played with that as well, but we haven't yet read the Rashi on that, which is going to go deeper into it. So, any questions on the main meaning of the verse before we jump into the Rashi?
We did read that Rashi. I was the reader, so I remember.
Okay, so then that was review, right? So Rashi basically makes the point that we just discussed, that this is using the whiteness to connect the tzara'at to the sheleg. Okay, then let's go with the next verse, starting with verse 7. Did we read the next verse, Joanna?
No.
Okay. Let's do the next one. Great. Thank you for that correction. Joel, I don't think you've read in a while. Do you want to read verse 7 of chapter 4, Vayomer?
Vayomer Hashev Yadcha El Chaikecha Vayeshev Yado El Chaiko Vayotziah Michaiko Vahine Shava Kivsaro. And he said, return your hand to your either breast or cloak, and he returned his hand to his breast or his cloak, and he took it out from his breast or his cloak, and behold, it had returned to its flesh.
Good. Okay. The translation that Joel provided presents the multiplicity of possible meanings for chayk. We have a sense of, we have a basic sense, if we had to stage direct the scene, what's actually happening. Once again, Moshe is complying with this instruction that God gives him for this second oath, this second sign that's really going to be, it's kind of like a magic trick in Moshe's hand to show the Israelites, to help them get to believe. Questions or comments on that verse before we look at the Rashi? Going once?
Well,
Right. Yeah? Rick?
Hi. Does anybody say anything about the weirdness of talking about snow in the wilderness? It's not like the Eskimos where they have 100 different ways of describing snow. We're not a snowy kind of people, so there wasn't anything white that they could compare it to besides snow. Anybody ever, any commentaries talk about that at all?
Well, what would you want to say about that?
Something white in Egypt, like alabaster, or some kind of thing that they would know, living hundreds of years in Egypt. Something, there's no snow in Egypt. I mean, why snow? It just popped in my head.
You're saying as the nimshal, as the analog for what something can be compared to. Why is that the not sheep, not alabaster?
Yeah. A white sheep. Yeah.
Right. It's an interesting question, from the perspective of Egypt. Like, it's very possible to imagine that those who lived in ancient Egypt had no idea what snow was, right? Because I don't think it really ever snows in Egypt. For those who lived in ancient Judea,
in the mountains, yeah,
they had to have a word for that stuff. Ancient Egypt, I'm just not sure, right? It's interesting to think before civilization knew about things that took place in other civilizations, they didn't need to have words for it. So that's an interesting question. It's a cousin to the question of the dolphin skins that are used in the Mishkan, right? The orot techashim, right? What's a tachash? What is a tachash skin, and why does the Mishkan get built with them, often translated as dolphin skins? It's a cousin to that question. I see some hands up in response maybe to the question. I saw Joanna's hand. I saw Diane and Larry's hand. So Joanna?
You stole my thunder. I was going to ask about the dolphins.
Dolphins, yeah. We don't know what we're referring to. If you're not sure not aware of that phrase in Parshat Truma, in the beginnings of in Mishkan, va'orot techashim va'atzei shitim, skins of a tachash and the wood of cedar. And for some reason, a tachash is translated in many English translations as dolphin skin. Clearly, well, maybe not clearly. Who am I to question the miraculous ways of the Holy One? But it's hard to imagine that even the Holy One would go through what it took to provide the Israelites with dolphin skins, which I don't even want to think about anyway. Why would you use a dolphin's skin? But it is one of these questions about how certain words, right? If we take the pullback approach, the meta approach to this, how certain words and images got into this text when they don't seem indigenous to the people about whom we're talking or the cultures. Rick?
The dolphins, I don't know if I've said it before. I learned from Rabbi Jack Reamer when I was in San Diego that there was a midrash that the dolphins tried to help the horses and humans survive the crossing of the Reed Sea. And so some of them got tangled up in the ropes and all that, and some of them got killed. And so they washed up on the shore. And that's where the dolphins came from, because of these altruistic dolphins. So they would be honored by using their skins for the tabernacle. So that, I think that's a Ethiopian, what do they call them? So Beta
Yisrael?
Yeah. That's a midrash from Ethiopia.
It's a very Jewish midrash, which is itself a tautology, right? That the reward for the dolphins' altruism is for them to be slaughtered and have their skins be used in the Mishkan, right? But that I was not aware of that midrash, but that's fascinating. Diane, and what's most fascinating about that midrash is that the rabbis couldn't figure it out either, right? That the fact that the midrash had to be written because they didn't understand how a tachash got into the desert. Diane, Larry?
I just wanted to comment that I think we're focusing wrong by thinking about Egypt in terms of where the story is written and edited and changed. There's snow in the hills of Judea and Jerusalem fairly regularly, and back then there would have been. There's snows on the Hermon and the mountains of Lebanon, and there is even snow in the Sinai Desert. And a true story, my sons and I were hiking in the Sinai Desert on a day when the temperature was over 40 degrees centigrade, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and all of a sudden there was a freak hailstorm, unbelievable, huge white balls of hail came down and covered the ground while the temperature outside was soaring. So it happens.
Yeah, hail is different than snow, obviously, right? In Hebrew and in English. So barad is different than sheleg. So unless the meaning of the word sheleg has changed in Hebrew in the last 2,000 years, my understanding is that when the Bible uses sheleg, it means snow. And snow is a much less common thing to happen in the Sinai Desert, I would think, than a hailstorm in the summer, right? I've also been in summer hailstorms, which is just strange, but it happens. Is there actually, you think there's snow on the peaks of Sinai Mountains in the winter? In the Sinai Desert?
I would guess that if you looked it up, probably historically there might have been, but I don't know that to be the case.
Interesting. Okay. Great. Anything else in this verse before we have Joel read the Rashi? Andy.
Hey, I just wanted to point out, it feels to me the construction of the sentence in this pasuk is kind of repetitive in an interesting way, where the chayk just keeps coming back again and again and again, 3 different times, as if it has to be repeated to understand when probably not necessary. And then you look back in the previous pasuk and it's almost like that, but when it says at the end, Vayotzia, it doesn't say mecheko as it does in this pasuk. So just something that caught my eye that may have significance.
Good. Baruch Shekivanta. Rashi's going to read some very interesting significance into that. This is going to spoiler alert, Rashi is going to read the verse in one of those ways where he says, and from this we learn this grand principle. And it's from that very specific thing. It's from the absence of the chayk in the removal of, it's from the presence of mechayko in the removal of his hand in this verse, where it's not in the previous verse. Right. So we'll get there in a second. Good pickup. Everyone see what he's looking at? That if you look in verse 6, last week's verse, Vayave yado bechayko, he brought his hand from his, hold on a second, did I just lose my place? Yeah, when he put his hand into his bosom in verse 6, and then his vayotziyah, he took it out. The verse just says he took it out. In our verse, and that was on the way to becoming white as leprosy. In our verse, where the momentary plague is reversed, it's vayashev yado el chayko. That's parallel. He returned his hand. He brought his hand out from his bosom. Vayotziyah mechayko, and he took it out from his bosom. The from his bosom is not present in the previous verse where it mentions the turn to the whiteness. And Rashi is going to play with that. Okay, so let's actually go right to that Rashi. Joel?
Vayotzia mecheko v'hinei shava bivsaro, and he took his hand out from his bosom, and behold, it was flesh. Mikan shemida tova. From this we learn that the a good thing, whatever midah is,
a measure, a characteristic in kind of rabbinic Hebrew, midah keneged midah, is that the punishment fits the crime, that like the value inherent in a certain action comes back to you, that if you're going to commit a certain aveirah, then your punishment will be in line with that. So here it's almost a midah of the Holy One, right? So the the Shlosh Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes of God, attributes, right, that we say on the Who Knows One. This is an expression of God's character, okay?
Midat Tova Mimaheret Lavo Mimidat Puranut. So a good characteristic comes faster than a bad characteristic, or a characteristic of punishment.
Good. So what Rashi doing so far, he's going to use he gives the general principle that he's learning first, and then he's going to explain to you why he thinks that, right? This is a very rabbinic way of making an argument. Our logic usually goes the opposite. We lay out the points first, and then we come to the conclusion, right? We learn from this that when God is exemplifying a positive, soft, compassionate attribute of God's, it comes quicker than when God is in the punishing, negative, dark realm. How do we know this? How does this come from the verse? This goes right to what Andrew was just picking up on. Sharei
B'rishona lo ne'emar mecheko. So when at the beginning it didn't say from his bosom.
Right. And what's the beginning? What's the specific reference?
Verse 6.
Right. In the beginning, in this 2-verse, 2-part miracle, put your hand in, look at it. Put your hand in again and look at it. In the first one, the word mecheko does not appear.
And he doesn't mention, it doesn't talk about doing the hokey pokey.
What does that mean?
He puts his hand in, he takes his hand out, but he doesn't do the hokey pokey.
Yes, no hokey pokey. So this is a very terse Rashi. Can you, Joel, or someone else fill in the words? If you were to write a paragraph about this Rashi, he only gives one half of the argument, and he doesn't even actually lay out the argument. How do we know that God's positive attributes come quicker than his negative attributes? Because in the first one, it didn't mention mecheko when the hand is coming out. No, what does that mean? Anyone want to flesh it out? Joel, anyone?
All I could say is if it was the opposite, he would have made the exact same argument. He would have said the absence of the word shows that it was even faster.
Correct. Can you make the argument that Rashi is making here, though? What's the argument in the word or the imagery?
So even before he took it out, it was already back to itself. He didn't have to remove it. Like in the process of taking it out, it was already done. It wasn't after he took it out.
Correct. That somehow the mecheko is okay. And the first time, it's not until he takes his hand all the way out and is looking at it that he realizes, it's white. Like Fred Flintstone realizing he had hit himself in the toe only after looking at the toe and seeing that it was swollen. It's going to hurt. Whereas this time, it's almost as if he's reading, as he was removing his hand from the inner fold of his cloak or his bosom, it was already healed, right? And somehow the mecheko, which you're right, Joe, you could read the opposite. The mecheko could be read as once it was fully taken out from his bosom. Rashi's reading it as in the departure from the chek, as Moshe looked at it, it's like, it turned back. It turned back to being normal, and it turned back to being normal even before I did the full out of where it was. That's sort of how Rashi's reading it. And he's learning a grand theological principle from this, or he's choosing to, right? Or the Midrash from Shemot Rabbah that he's taking from it is choosing to. Look, yes, God is punishing. God can bring you tzarat. And yes, God can heal. But the healing comes quicker, right? Sometimes I think that these sorts of Midrashim, these imputations to God's character is a tremendous example of hundreds of years of rabbinic wishful thinking that was belied by what they experienced, because we actually happen to know that they experienced so much of the opposite, that the harshness of the world that they experienced from God came quicker and more often than the ease. Okay, I saw Vered's hand. I'm not sure if it was for this point or something else. I saw Barry's hand, but it's down, and I saw Sue's hand. So Vered, bevakasha.
I just actually have a very short comment about diseases in Hebrew, and Baheret and Metzorat and all those. So there's a reference in Vayikra about Baheret, and it means Baheret from the word Bahir, which we understand that is white, like pale. The skin is pale. So all those words belong to a section of diseases in Hebrew. There's a Mishkal Machalot.
Yes.
That was just a comment.
Thank you. And the colors of those diseases, including Adam and Adam Dam and Yarok and Yarak Rak, get a lot of attention.
Ademet is rubella, and Shapat, which is a flu, comes from influenza, which is lehashpia, the verb. Right. So there is a whole section like this of diseases. That's what was my comment.
Thank you.
Which is interesting,
Right, diseases that are sourced in the color of what they do to the body. Yeah.
Right.
Right. I mean, not great, but great comment. Sue, Vakasha.
I know it's spelled differently, but all this cheko and this kind of what looks like a wait for it magic trick, voila, that kind of thing, except until you get to that very end, it sounds like the word chikui lechakot. And so there may be a little playing there with the idea that you wait for it. But in the last bit, there's no waiting. Here it is. Voila.
Yeah, it's a different root because lechakot is kaf. With a kuf, chikui is to impersonate, right? Vered, to mimic. So if there's any etymological connection, I don't know if there is, it would be the chikui having to do with being like something else as opposed to waiting. But Midrash doesn't always care about Shorashim, so I accept your Midrash. Barry, your hand was up and down. Going once? Okay.
Yeah, here. So it's kind of redundant, I guess, by now. It would seem that when we're connected to Hashem, it's all smooth. It's all connected. So whether it's fast or slow makes no difference. It's connected. When we disconnect from Hashem, then there's timing involved.
Yeah. In other words, you say that one more time. That
when we're connected to Hashem, time is immaterial.
It's just
when we disconnect with Hashem, then time is material.
Interesting. Okay. Good. Right. So I think that is a rendering of what is happening in the Midrash that Rashi's pulling from. It's from a pretty. Not only is it a weak proof text, as Joel pointed out, it's a proof text that could literally be read the exact opposite direction. Sometimes Midrash is a problem in a verse looking for a sermon, and sometimes it's a sermon looking for a problem in a verse, right? So if you really think about Midrash as sermonica, which we talked about in the past, right? I think about this as a rabbi, as a teacher. I imagine the rabbis in the academies in Surah and Pampadita on a Thursday afternoon in the year 240 saying, what am I going to teach my students this week? Right? It's Parshat Shemot. What am I going to pull out of it? Or what religious lesson is it significant for me to communicate? Not because it's the Parsha, because I haven't talked about this concept. Is that snow in the Sinai? Thank you. And voila. There was no mecheko. There is a cheko. I can do something with that. I know that rabbinic pressure. I know that teaching pressure. Lahavdil elef alfei havdalot. But to go back to what we were talk about the beginning of the class. So Friday morning is the funeral for Rosemary's son, and I'm gonna be there with the family on Long Island to officiate this funeral. And I've been thinking about what do you say when words are an insult? When any attempt to put words to something which is beyond words, how to come up with the words is impossible. And so I've been thinking about what can I find? What is waiting for me? What's a hook that can offer some comfort and some empathy to an utterly shattered family?
Meditation.
And I'm probably going to use something in from the book of Eicha, which we're already begun to think about. You can be my therapist for a second. And I can share with you that I'm thinking of the phrase from the book of Eicha, Ein menachem la, that Jerusalem is described as there's no one to comfort her.
I don't know if you realize that since Liana died, Isaac accused himself and has since that time been depressed of it's being his fault, even though it was a drunk driver that ran into them, crossed the yellow marked lines on Olympic Boulevard at CPE. They were going east. They had just come from Sinai Temple for Shabbat services. It was a terrible tragedy. In some ways worse even than this one, but this was horrible too. And I have terrible, horrible feelings for them. It's just awful. Just thought you should know the significance. Isaac has never been the same person. If there's anything you can add that might help him, because I'm worried he's liable to kill himself over this.
Let's move from there. There's my fault in bringing us back into here, particularly because we're on Facebook. We're in a semi-public zone right here, and yes, I hear every word you're saying, Barbara, and thank you. The point being that as we look at what the rabbis are pulling out from the absence or the presence of mecheko in this tiny little action, I identify with what it means to try to squeeze everything from that verse to give a sermon, be able to teach something, right? And this one, it could be read in both directions simultaneously. Stevie.
Yeah, I think that the fact that it could be read in both directions is actually what's motivating them more to speak, rather than the pressure to say something at all, but rather someone could read this and could easily think that, God is quick to punish and slow to forgive. And the rabbis want to emphatically reject that notion.
Great. That's a really helpful comment, Stevie. Thank you. Right. They want to emphatically reject it, and they found something to hook it onto. Sue, since you asked publicly, Reuben was killed in a plane crash. In a small plane crash taking off from the Aspen airport on Saturday night. Barry.
In the level of unspeakableness how does one respond to the Shoah in the innocence, the millions of innocents, the millions of innocents? So take it from there. Take it from there. There you are. Okay. I don't treasure what you have to do.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to Torah, where our endless font of interest and inspiration. Okay, so anything else you want to mine from this verse? Okay, Joel, you were on and you were off pretty quickly. Carol, do you want to read verse 8?
Okay, sure. V'haya im lo ya'aminu lach velo yishma'u l'kol ha'ot harishon v'ha'aminu l'kol ha'ot ha'acharon. And so it will be, or it will come to pass, if they do not believe you, and they do not hear or heed to the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the last sign.
Good. And I got no improvements on that translation, but I would love to open up the verse to questions, things that jump out at you, particularly on here to lead the witness on the way that Carol accurately translated it. Does that accurate translation bring up a question on how the verse is constructed? Larry, Diane?
So I'm not sure I heard, Carol, your translation of the very last word?
The last sign.
Okay, so the thing that comes to mind is a lot of people are probably looking at JPS either in the Eitz Chaim or on Sefaria, and I'm also looking at Aryeh Kaplan, and they translate it as they will believe the second. They translate Acharon as second. And Aryeh Kaplan does too, which is really a shock to me. He says they will believe the evidence of the second sign. Alter doesn't. Alter says they will believe the voice of the second. Whoa, I'm wrong. The voice of the second sign. Why did Acharon become second and not the last or?
It's because of what happens in the next verse, because there's a third sign that's about to come. So they're translating with anticipation.
Yeah, but that's not translation when you're translating with anticipation. Unless someone's going to tell me that Acharon can have some sort of meaning that either means second, which it clearly doesn't, or the previous.
Yeah.
Or former and latter.
Right. Everett Fox goes latter. Everett Fox translates this verse, so it shall be, comma, if they do not trust you. That's how he renders the mean. I like that. And do not hearken to the voice of the former sign. I love it, hearken, because hearken, we know it means listen to, but somehow the relation between listen to and voice and sign is hard to make sense of. So hearken to the voice of the former sign, then that they will put their trust in the voice of the latter sign. So he renders Rishon and Acharon as former and latter, a little bit less of an ordinal number, first and second. And well, I see a lot of hands up, which is wonderful. I want to hear everyone's thoughts. Remember, we have the constant translation problem. Aleph Chet Resh is translated in modern English as after or other, right? There are mountain ranges in between what that word meant then and how the English words create meaning in our minds now. And there are plenty of places of the Torah where it's very hard to render Aleph Chet Resh or words that are built from it using our common English understanding. So for instance, Akedat Yitzchak, after the angel says no to Abraham, right? Don't slay your son. V'hinei ayal acher nechaz basvach. There was an ayal, I forgot the exact word. I think it was ayal. There is a ram that is stuck nechaz basvach in the thicket, but there's an acher there. Is it another one? Another one compared to what? Is it referring to a place like achar, meaning over there? It doesn't mean second. It's hard for it to mean anything that we normally translate achar into. So it's one of those roots that we think we know what it means in terms of modern usage, achar and acharei, and it's not 100% clear what it means then. And one other comment on that, there are midrashim, plenty of midrashim on the difference between vayhi acharei hadvarim ha'eleh and vayhi achar hadvarim ha'eleh, right? That even though we normally would think of them as interchangeable, and it was, after those things transpired, the rabbis do midrash on whether or not the word after that is present in the Hebrew text is achar and acharei, which means that they were also trying to figure out what it means. So yes, Larry, good pickup that the translation of acharon into second is not obvious. It's also not easy to translate that word. Diane.
So what about the use of the word lach? Lo ya'aminu lach. Is it really referring to Moshe, in which case we would think it would be lacha? Or is it referencing back to the act that they're not believing, and that's why it's lach?
Yeah. There are a couple of places, more than a couple, in many places in Torah's Hebrew and certainly in Prophet's Hebrew, where what we would consider to be an absolute when it comes to gender, lacha only for male and lach only for female. And if anything, we see the bias in the other direction, where women are included in a masculine form, but men would never be included in a feminine form. There's an asterisk to that occasionally, unless you want to go really into a stretchy midrash, it's lach is used for a masculine, and oftentimes is understood by the scholars that I study with has to do with meter and trope, right? So there are two versions of Yedid Nefesh, right? And one of the versions of Yedid Nefesh is ahavatach, and one is ahavatcha. So one of the ways of reading it is that it's referring to the masculine experience of God and the feminine, the Shekhinah. And most say, no, it's just a question of poetry. And, if you're writing a poem in iambic pentameter, you have to make sure that the syllables are right. And something about the trup of munach katon here, where there being a stress on the penultimate penultimate syllable of ya'aminu, as opposed to ya'aminu, somehow pulls a half syllable from the lacha and makes it a lach. It's almost a cousin to how sheleg, haha, becomes shaleg, lechem becomes lachem, and other forms like that, where a word appears in a verse impacts how many micro syllables you have, and therefore sometimes even the vowel changes. Or we should read it midrashically, and there is a feminine object here that we should be thinking about. Okay, I have no idea the order, so I'll just look at my screen. Norm and Rachel, go first.
I think when we talk about hearkening, it's more than just hearing. It implies, at least to me, that you hear something and accept it or rely on it or act on it. That it isn't just something that you consider and perhaps reject. It's something you consider and accept.
That the rendering of it hearken is saying that it's not just an auditory experience, but an accepting of what is incumbent upon you as a result. Good. I like that. Leonard, Rebecca?
According to my dictionary, acharon means not only last and latter, but it can also mean next. So in other words, this doesn't have to be the last sign. It could be the next sign.
Uh-huh. The next one.
The other thing I was going to say is that I'm not going to be available next week.
Okay. Great. Not great they're not going to be available, but great in terms of another possibility for acharon, which certainly if it's part of a series, right, then next makes sense. Thank you for whoever wrote about sheleg, that this is the only, not quite a hapak legomenon, but that it's a very rare noun in the Torah. Joanna.
This whole thing about listening to the sign fascinates me, because I either would have expected both of the verbs to apply to Moshe. They won't believe you and they won't listen to your voice. And it's not your voice, but the voice of the sign, whatever that means, or else for the verbs to be reversed at least, right? They won't listen to your voice and they won't believe the signs that they have seen. And so there's something about the words here, and also just this whole concept of we expect seeing, they won't believe what they would have seen. What's the connection between these signs and the act of hearing, listening, especially with the reference to snow? Because unlike other forms of precipitation, snow has virtually no sound when it falls.
Right. So that comment is dancing around the comment that I was wondering someone was going to make directly, which is, what is the voice of a sound? What is the voice of a sign? Why, if it's oat, why is it kol? If it's kol, why is it oat? Right. I say that with a twinkle. A dear colleague of mine, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, who was ordained from JTS year before I, and then made Aliyah after working in the States for a little bit. He's an incredible artist. We've had him as the artist in residence for the Kolker Klein Shapiro artist in residence, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And he worked with the kids in the Pressman Academy to help them illuminate a Megillah, which you can see pieces of in the whatever lobby is downstairs in our building. Is that Schneider or Alpern? I always forget which lobby is which. He has an organization in Israel that is dedicated to bringing this type of artistic work into the Jewish educational experience, and it's called Kol Ha'ot. Kol Ha'ot. I never asked him where he got that from. Maybe it's from this verse, or maybe there's another place in the Torah where Kol and Ot are associated. But it's a wonderful, whimsical name. The sound of the sign, right? When we get to Exodus, we get to Revelation, we'll also hear that where there are things that shouldn't be visible that are being seen, and things that should not be audible are being heard. And here we have that. So the sound of the sign. Anyone else want to jump in response to what Joanna said, or what I'm offering here in terms of the relationship between kol and ot, or just the flow of the verbs and the objects here? Barry or Rick?
Yeah. If you picture a huge crowd, the people at the front actually see what's going on, and then they tell the people behind them. It's kind of like the Shamor v'Zachor kind of thing. Some people heard it this way, some people heard it that way. So he's going to show the signs to the elders, and then the elders have to tell all their people. So that's how it becomes from visual to hearing, I think. I don't know. Good.
Barry?
Well, just a couple of comments here, and then the comment that I raised my hand for. When they stood at Mount Sinai, this word was used, but they didn't. I don't know what they saw or what they heard, but everyone had a separate experience. A deaf person looking at an art experience has a different sensory experience than a hearing person does. Now, my comment, God gave the first sign to Moshe for what reason? So that maybe people wouldn't believe what God is showing. God would give a second thing to Moshe so that people maybe not believe. But what's going on here? Why is God doing this? What's the setup? Okay.
Good. Joel?
I have no doubt that ot does, means sign, doesn't mean letter when it was written, and doesn't mean letter when Rashi was reading it. But to our modern ears, it's almost like God's making a pun. If he doesn't listen to your first letter or when you first start talking, he'll listen to the sign.
So that ot means letter in one place and sign in the next place. Yeah. Good. Anything else on this before we look at? Did we read the Rashi on this? No, we haven't read the Rashi on this. Anything else on the verse itself? Okay. Diane Larry, yes.
Only that I think that ot can also be translated as a note, although not a musical note, but a musical note is a symbol of a sound, a kol.
Yeah.
But that's probably only valid in English, translating into note.
Yeah. Vayiru et hakolot. I think we're going to get that verse in Revelation that they saw the sounds, right? So in Connecticut, when you grow up, there's a stupid pun that what's one of the only sounds you can see? The Long Island sound, because I don't know why that body of water is called a sound. Maybe it's on my mind because I'm going to be seeing it tomorrow. Actually, I have no idea why that body of water is called a sound, but that's a Connecticut and Long Island joke. You can see a sound, the Long Island sound. Joanna is nodding her head because she knows that one. But why? Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you think about magic and tricks, they're never done in silence. And in fact, they would be weird if they were done in absolute silence. There's either music or there's whoosh or something. So I don't know.
Andrew, you're from the South Shore, right? So you don't care about the sound. You care about the Atlantic Ocean. But we're more provincial. On the southern shore of Connecticut and the northern shore of Long Island, it's all about the sound and the Port Jefferson Ferry. So don't.
Mea culpa.
Oceanside is an entirely different part of the world. Stevie.
Yeah, I don't know quite what kol ha'ot can mean, but I do want to point out that in verse 1 of this chapter, Moses is worried about Yishma'u l'koli. So they're like, whatever this means, it's a distinct shift from listening to Moses, right? Yaminu li becomes Yaminu lach, which is consistent, and then Yishma'u l'koli becomes Yishma'u l'kol ha'ot, which is something different. I don't know what it is, but it's relevant, I think.
That's really, that's a great association. It's as if Moshe lacks confidence in what Moshe can produce on his own. And so God and God's miracles are going to be the intermediary, the voice that's going to be present for the Israelites and eventually the Egyptians to either believe or not believe, right? So you don't trust your voice, you're halting, perhaps stuttering voice, Moshe. There's going to be another voice, and it's going to be the voice that it's going to be God's voice exemplified through these magic tricks that I'm giving you. Good. Okay, Carol, back to the Rashi. I think we have time to get through this Rashi. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll probably need some help with this. Okay, v'haminu l'kol ha'ot ha'acharon. Misha tomar lahem bishvilchem lakiti al she siparti alechem lashon hara ya'aminu lach. Shekvar lamdu bekach sheha mizdugin.
Mizdavgin. It's a hard word. Mizdavgin.
Mizdavgin lehara lahem lokim b'negaim kagon faro v'avimelech bishvil sarah.
Okay, so some tough words in there will help you. What I want you, Carol, and what else we're thinking about is this important ongoing question, Rashi. What's the question he's answering? He's starting with the answer. So the question is, what is the thing in the verse to which he's responding? We will induce that by translating the Rashi. Okay, go ahead. And none of, when you all asked questions on the verse, none of you yet asked the question. Sometimes you anticipate Rashi's question. None of you asked the question to which Rashi is responding here. Go ahead.
Okay. When you say to them, or I guess that's what the Misha.
Yep. When you or once you, one of the two. Yeah.
Okay. Once you say to them, for you or for your sake, I don't know, lakiti.
Right. So a malkot in rabbinic Hebrew are lashes. Lamed kuf hey is to be. It's to be afflicted, sometimes to be whipped, but it means to. If a nega comes on you, you are nilka. You are afflicted with a nega, with a certain kind of a plague. So once you say to them, you should put, if you're annotating this, put in quotation marks, bishvilchem lakiti. It is for your sake that I was stricken. When was he stricken?
On account of I spoke lashon hara. I spoke ill of you.
Right. So what is that referring to?
One of the times that, I don't know whether when he was angry with them for not being patient, I'm assuming.
So
isn't the hand?
Right. So the midrashic understanding, not the pshat understanding, the midrashic understanding of the verses that we read, if any of you on this class missed any of the previous two classes, it might be missing, is that the reason why one of the signs is that Moshe experiences temporary tzara'at is because Moshe exhibited temporary, but to God, painful distrust in the Israelites in saying about them erroneously they're non-believers. That was considered midrashically to be lashon hara. So yeah, it was just a sign, but while God was giving Moshe the sign he was going to use to convince the Israelites, God was also giving him a zetz. You're gonna say lashon hara about my people, you're gonna get some lashon hara about that. So now it builds on itself. That very fact that Moshe, while being given the sign to use to convince the Israelites, was himself afflicted, is going to help convince the Israelites that he should be trusted. Why? Once you tell them that it's on your account, my having said terrible things about you, that I was afflicted with this sign in the trial run, then they will believe you. As yaminulach, they will believe you. Why? Now try to do the shekfar lamdu.
Because they've already learned from this. I don't know what the mizdavgin is.
What's the root? What's the three-letter Hebrew root, you think? What can you pull out of there?
I don't know, the Zion Daled Gimel? I don't know.
The Dalet is part of the Hitpael when a first letter root with a Zion is in a Hitpael, you throw in a Dalet rather than a Taf or a Tet. So the Dalet.
Zion Gimel Nun?
Close? Anyone? Zion Vav Gimel. Zug, pair.
Oh.
Lizaveg means to pair up. A zivug min hashamayim is a match made in heaven, right? So there's and in modern Hebrew, lihiz daveg means to couple with someone. Wink, wink. I remember a moment when I was in Israel spending Shabbat on Moshav with one of my cousins, this modern Orthodox Moshav, and a cousin on the other side of the family who was recently very, very, very frum and studying in yeshiva and also learning spoken Hebrew much after he was learning rabbinic Hebrew. We were walking to shul and in a group, and he was trying to say that he's looking for someone to have a chavruta with, but he said ani mechapes mishu lihiz davegimo, which does not mean that. It means I'm looking for a guy to hook up with. It was because he was trying. I'm looking for someone to be coupled with, but that's not what it means in modern Hebrew. Okay, so and not what he wanted to convey. So here, it's a sense of zug, not a person to a person, but a sense of if someone attaches themselves to a certain thing. It's a weird way of understanding. I don't know why he used the word mizdavgin, but they've already learned that mizdavgin lahara, when you attach yourself, that's the best way I can do it, to evil or to evil speech in this situation, lahem, now I'm doing your translation, keep going, shemizdavgin lahara lahem.
So is this lokim same as the lakiti, same root?
Correct.
I forgot what you said that means.
Smitten or stricken?
Stricken with, and is this the plagues, the negaim?
Correct. And maybe the best way to render this in English is that they, the Israelites, have already learned that those who attach themselves to do evil things to them, the Israelites, or about them, those very people are afflicted or stricken with plagues. How do the Israelites who are slaves in Egypt know that? Kagon.
Like Pharaoh and Avimelech.
Yeah.
Who were on account of Sarah.
Right. And what do you remember what that's a reference to?
No.
Anyone? Barry?
She's my sister.
Yeah. Stevie, you got it.
Correct. There are three mini narratives in the book of Genesis, 2 with Abraham and 1 with Isaac, sometimes with Pharaoh, sometimes with Avimelech, sometimes in Egypt, sometimes in Gerar, where Sarah or Rebecca is taken temporarily by one of those foreign leaders. There is a weird situation where the husband in the situation says that he's allowing it to happen for her own benefit. And then whether it's being stricken with a dream or waking up in the morning and being stricken with a plague, Avimelech or Pharaoh for having abducted an Israelite woman, Rivka or Sarah, is stricken. So the way this midrash is built is the Israelites in Egypt know their stories. They know the book of Breshit. Their ancestors lived through it. They know it, and they know that it does happen that in God's world, when you take an evil stance with respect to the Israelites, you're going to get stricken. Therefore, Moshe, you have double believability. You're going to go in front of them and you're going to say, look at this magic trick. And the reason why God chose this magic trick for me to show to you is because I have to admit to you, Israelites, that I didn't believe that you were going to believe, which means I said lashon hara about you, which means I had to experience temporary leprosy, which I'm now experiencing again, which you're about to show was due because you're about to believe. That's going to make them believe. Right? All of that is built up in these 10 or 11 words. Larry, Diane.
So if I understand correctly, Rashi is referring to when Moses is talking to God in front of the burning bush, when Moses is struck with Sarat himself later on and being punished, when Abraham and Jacob and Yaakov, and Isaac had the Pharaoh or Avimelech struck. So all these different times in once, right?
All these are being referenced, yes.
Right, at one time. So I'm watching Loki while I'm on the elliptical, and I think that Rashi ought to be reported to the Time Variance Authority, the Time Police, whose job it is to make sure that things are occurring on the right timeline. This is really wacky that Rashi thinks, because he actually thinks that the people will understand all these references, right?
Right. Are you using Loki with a pun?
No, there's a Disney Marvel Comics series called Loki, which is just perfect timing for about 45 minutes on the elliptical.
Right. It's also, I thought you were making a Loki reference. If you look, this is just one of the places you're referring to. If you look at the screen I'm sharing, 12th chapter of Breshit, I think it's Lech Lecha, the whole story, and you could just see the language. Vayinaga Adonai et Paro. God, the root here is not laka. The root of the verb is the root nega. God afflicted Pharaoh, negaim dolim, very great afflictions. Viet Beito and his household, the Aldavar Sarai Eshet Avram, on account of what he did to Sarah, the wife of Abraham. What is if you wanted to poke an enormous hole in Rashi's comment here and the series of midrashim he came from, is that what's going to be much more present in the Israelites' mind, how an ancient Pharaoh was afflicted for having taken Sarah, whom Abraham gave him permission to, or how the current Pharaoh has not yet been afflicted for having enslaved them for 400 years, right? So if he's going to make the point, Israelites, that just as I'm experiencing momentary tzara'at because I did some evil things to you, and that's the way of the world, you might have 600,000 Israelites saying it hasn't been the way of the world for us in the last few hundred years. So it's a very interesting analogy that Rashi is using as a proof, the notion that pharaohs are, it's one thing if he uses it as a prediction, but as a proof to believe me that pharaohs are afflicted when they mistreat the Israelites. That has not been the Israelites' experience, at least the Israelites to which Moshe is speaking. Joanna, and then we'll close.
And we know whether we're talking about Israelites or pharaohs, people have a pretty short-term memory in Egypt at that time because, a generation after Joseph, nobody remembered who he was anymore. So let alone going back in time even further.
Yes, very good.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.